Hello, American probation and parole audience, and welcome to this session on TIDES, our innovative model which merges trauma-informed care and desistance from crime theories into probation supervision. My name is Joseph Arvidsson. In a moment, I'm going to allow my colleague, Nicole Kimberly Staley, to introduce herself, but allow me to tell you a little bit about myself first before we dive into this truly what we feel is revolutionary content. This model is really the culmination of my 35 plus years in corrections. My journey has taken me from the fundamentals of evidence-based practices to the nuanced art of facilitation. And I've also had the privilege of becoming a master trainer in the LSCMI, the Level of Service Case Management Inventory. Additionally, I am a passionate practitioner of a variety of core correctional skills. But what has truly enlivened my career is a deep-rooted interest in desistance theory, the study of how and why individuals cease engaging in criminal behavior. This fascination has not only shaped my approach to rehabilitation and corrections, but also allowed me to bring these insights to diverse audience across 4 different continents. It's a blessing to have shared this knowledge with a global community, learning and growing together in our understanding of what it takes to support change and recovery. Today, I bring these experiences to you through TIDES, our trauma-informed desistance framework, our innovative way of integrating trauma-informed care with the transformative power of desistance. Join me as we navigate this approach and unveil how it can revolutionize our interactions and support systems for those on a journey to a new chapter in their lives. Now, allow me to introduce you to my colleague, Nicole Kimberly Staley.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited that you're going to be joining us in this presentation today, or whenever that time is for you, as you're watching our session here. Quite as much time in as Joe, but I've had about 25 years of working in the criminal justice field and with clients from a lot of different perspectives. A lot of the focus of my career has really been on the training, facilitation, and implementation of evidence-based practices, with a really specific emphasis on trauma-informed, gender-responsive, and cognitive behavioral interventions. I've been passionate for years about combining that space of being trauma-informed with our more maybe traditional cognitive behavioral and evidence-based approaches. And I'm so excited to share some of the results of not only the years of practice, but of the research in our TIDES program model with you all. So I am a trainer in motivational interviewing. I trained extensively in a lot of different cognitive behavioral programs, had the opportunity to develop the domestic violence education program, which is a trauma-informed cognitive behavioral intervention for clients who commit acts of domestic violence. So a lot of different opportunities to, again, merge these theories in the work that I do. I've trained and written extensively on the efficacy and the need for those trauma-informed interventions when working with justice-involved and marginalized clients from a lot of different perspectives. So I'm currently an independent trainer, coach, implementation specialist for counties, states, community-based nonprofit agencies, really a lot of different spaces supporting professionals who are working with justice-impacted individuals. I'm a continuing education instructor in trauma-informed care at a local college. And so really just have had so many opportunities to bring all of these different perspectives together into practice. So I'm very excited to talk more about what that looks like in the TIDES framework. And so to start out, something I always say whenever I'm training in this trauma-informed space, is that I don't want to just talk about what it means to be trauma-informed. I really want us to have opportunities to put those theories into practice. And something you're going to hear Joe and I talk a lot about in our time together today is the idea of being regulated, being able to calm, being able to manage stressful or overwhelming emotional reactions. one way of doing that is to ground ourselves. And so, in that spirit of not just talking about being trauma informed, but modeling that the best of our abilities to creating a trauma informed, a safe space, even in our virtual interactions, I'd like us all to take a couple of minutes and do an exercise that I call square breathing or 4x4 breathing. A lot of you have probably heard about it. It's a very common breathing exercise. Something I really love about it is you really just need something as simple as a Post-it note to kind of be your visual reference to really pay attention to and calm and even your breathing. So I'm really going to encourage you, wherever you're at, whatever space you're in, to take a minute or two and go through this breathing exercise with us. So if you have a Post-it note, or even just looking at the squares on the slide that you see, on the visual that you have in front of you, I'm going to talk you through and kind of explain what it'll look like, and then we'll do this together. So the idea of square breathing is to use that square as a visual reference to help you calm and even your breaths. So as you think about looking along and kind of tracing visually the top side of your square, you can take a nice deep breath in. Then as you imagine going along the side of the square, you're going to hold that inhale. You're going to exhale as you go along the bottom. And then you're going to hold that inhale as you go back up along the top. So again, you can trace that as Joe is doing on kind of the card or the Post-it note he has in front of you. You can imagine it on the slide there. So we're just going to do this together. I'll walk us through a couple of rotations, if you will, and then I'll give you some time to do that on your own. So if everyone's ready, go ahead and get comfortable in your chair, in your space. And start at just the top corner of the Post-it note. Take a nice deep breath in. Trace along the top of that Post-it note, the top of that square. And then hold that inhale as you go along the side. Nice, even exhale as you go along the bottom. And hold that exhale as you go back up. I want you to try to do this again in kind of your own pace. So nice, deep inhale. And hold. Nice, even exhale. And hold. Maybe one more time. So deep breath in. Hold that inhale. Nice, even exhale. And then hold. When you're ready, go ahead and kind of resettle yourself a little bit. Last deep breath in. So thank you for jumping in with that exercise. It's a wonderful resource. We use it a lot with clients. We'll talk about a lot of different examples of them. But again, all you need is kind of that simple Post-it note and giving yourself a couple of minutes to really breathe. So good job.
As professionals familiar with the risk, need, responsivity framework, it is crucial to remember that at its core, R&R is about understanding what leads individuals into criminal behavior, those criminogenic needs. This understanding is fundamental to effective intervention and rehabilitation. The pathways into crime are often complex and multifaceted. They can include factors like socioeconomic status, family background, substance abuse, peer associations, and more. By identifying and understanding these pathways, we can tailor our interventions to address the root causes of criminal behavior rather than just the symptoms. This approach is not only about reducing recidivism, but also about fostering a positive change in individuals. When we comprehend the why behind the crime, we can guide individuals towards more constructive and law-abiding paths. Remember, each person's path into crime is unique. This individualized understanding is key to the responsivity principle of the R&R model, ensuring our interventions are suited to each person's specific needs and circumstances. Understanding these pathways also helps in risk assessment, another cornerstone of the R&R framework. It enables us to predict potential future criminal behavior and take proactive steps to mitigate those risks. Let's remember this concept of the pathways into crime and reflect on why a deep understanding of criminogenic needs is essential in our roles. Think about how this knowledge has shaped or could shape your interactions and strategies with your clients. But when we define success in criminal justice, we often look at what doesn't happen as a sign of progress. The absence of new probation violations, the absence of arrest, the absence of convictions signals that an individual is not reoffending, which we take as success in risk reduction. Recidivism reduction remains the primary goal for our interventions. It's a clear, measurable outcome that indicates our efforts in rehabilitation are working. However, this traditional measure tells us only one part of the story. We focus on the absence of negative outcomes, what's missing, which is crucial, but we should also ask ourselves, now what? It's not enough to only measure the negatives. We must also look at the positives that our clients are adding to their lives. This includes gainful employment, positive relationships, stable housing, and educational achievements. While the absence of risk is our success metric, let's also define success by the presence of these positive pro-social factors. In essence, the absence of risk is the starting line, not the finish line. Our client's journey continues beyond avoiding negatives. It's about actively pursuing a positive, fulfilling life. As we move forward, let's consider both aspects. What are we avoiding and what are we striving towards? This balanced perspective will guide us in shaping a more comprehensive approach to supporting our clients. Reflecting on this, reflect on your current practices and your current approaches to work with justice-involved individuals and ask yourself, what's missing in my approach to my interventions?
So I love that Joe has talked about the efficacy of R&R, and I agree 100%. A big part of my career has been training on all of those different spaces. I've also experienced, though, that we are missing certain pieces. And a big piece that we are missing when we are really just looking at defining success by the absence of risk or the absence of antisocial behaviors is understanding a couple of things. One of which is how trauma impacts those pathways in to criminal behavior and the role it can play in helping clients find those pathways out. So throughout our conversations and embedded in the TIDES model is this understanding of the role of trauma in our pathways. So we're going to be talking about it from 3 different perspectives, both in terms of how we understand what trauma is and the potential for re-traumatization, especially for clients involved in the justice system. We're going to talk a little bit about our perceptions as the professionals working to support our clients, of understanding and looking at behaviors that we often define as antisocial, adverse, resistant, defiant, dysfunctional. We see these behaviors as the problems that we need to eliminate. But if we start to think about those behaviors in terms of survival, that oftentimes for the clients who've experienced an extensive amount of trauma, and we know from a lot of different research out there, and that I'll talk more about, clients involved in the justice system have experienced multiple experiences of complex trauma. We know that many of those clients have had to learn to survive in very specific ways that, again, often appear like these adverse behaviors. So, we're going to talk about shifting our perceptions. And finally, we're going to explore then what is our role? If our role is, in addition to reducing those risks, of building up success and protective factors, of helping our clients, again, find those pathways out of lifestyles defined by crime, we're going to explore this concept of how do we help build resilience? How do we help build protective factors that, again, will help move those clients closer to and further along those pathways? So we explore that role of trauma. And as Joe has described, we also are really focusing on these concepts of desistance theory. So again, those pathways out. The heart, the core of desistance, and Joe is our expert, but essentially what we're really looking at is what are the factors that help drive someone away from this life of crime towards a life of fulfillment and joy and hope and all of those protective spaces that Joe was talking about earlier. So, what we've done again in TIDES is to take what we know about trauma and its impacts and how we build resilience and to discover and explore the synergy of those concepts with the basic concepts of desistance to arrive at a model of supervision that we firmly believe, while again still rooted in what we all know and respect of R&R, but of really being able to take those next steps to what can we do differently to further support our clients? How do we help them again move forward on those pathways out of a criminal lifestyle? So for our time here today, we're going to be exploring our TIDES model. We're going to be exploring the philosophies behind it. And what you see here on the screen then are our training intentions. I always like to use the phrase intentions when when I'm training, because what you take away, how you interpret, how this applies to your work is up to you, right? So the value that you find, the interest that it creates, we're excited to hear more about. So our intentions with you today are to explore those underlying philosophies, to check out what the research tells us about trauma-informed care, about desistance, and what Joe is going to talk about in a minute in terms of neuroscience awareness and how all of those pieces connect to inform the TIDES model. We're going to then give you a little bit more of an overview of TIDES and what we call our pillars of change. So those 4 components you see on your screens. The importance of self-regulation, identity, resilience, social support. Again, things we sometimes talk about in our R&R perspectives, but we're going to focus and explore those in a very different way and really augment the work that we're currently doing. And finally, we're going to share a little bit with you all just in terms of what we call our TIDES compass. How do we put these theories into practice? It's something both Joe and I are passionate about. We were practitioners for many years before we kind of segued into these roles of facilitators and trainers and researchers. And so we are excited not just to tell you about the theory, but really to give you some ideas on how you can put these theories into practice in your daily work supporting clients.
Nicole just referenced the 3 perspectives that really informed us when we were formulating and thinking of what would become the 4 pillars of TIDES. And those 3 perspectives are sort of known as the 3 philosophies that really inform this model. Those of neuroscience awareness, trauma-informed care, and desistance from crime. So as we pivot a little bit here to discussing these philosophies underpinning TIDES, it's really crucial to recognize how this model innovatively merges the strengths of these 3 disciplines. Think of neuroscience awareness as our foundation. It empowers us with knowledge about how the brain works and responds to experiences, including trauma and rehabilitation efforts. It's like having a map of the terrain we want to navigate in our interventions. Now, trauma-informed care is sort of like our approach. It ensures that we're sensitive to the trauma histories of our clients, and this perspective influences every interaction, providing a compassionate lens through which we view each individual's journey. And finally, desistance from crime is somewhat like our destination. It's the theoretical framework that guides our understanding of how individuals move away from crime. It's not merely the cessation of crime, but the process of positive identity development and finding a new purpose. Now, each of these disciplines interlocks with the others, creating a comprehensive model that addresses the complexities of criminal behavior change. And by integrating these, TIDES offers a nuanced approach that respects the intricate nature of human behavior and the possibility of transformation. Now, in the upcoming sections, we're going to delve into each of these philosophies in detail, examining how they inform our practice and contribute to the effectiveness of the TIDES model. We will explore the practical applications and the transformative potential of this approach. Let's start with neuroscience. Neuroscience is the scientific study of the nervous system, particularly focusing on the brain structure and function. It's like being an architect and an engineer all rolled into one, understanding both the blueprint and operational dynamics of the brain. Now, in the context of TIDES, when we talk about structure, we're referring to the physical aspects of the brain, its anatomy, the neural pathways, and how different areas of the brain are interconnected. It's akin to examining the wiring and circuits of a complex machine. Function pertains to the brain's myriad activities, how we think, how we feel, how we make decisions, and how we behave. It's about the software running on the hardware, controlling everything from our reflexes to our reasoning. Understanding neuroscience allows us to appreciate why certain behaviors may be more challenging to change and help us identify the most effective point of intervention. It's the understanding that just as a stroke can change a person's ability to speak, trauma can fundamentally alter a person's behavioral responses. For our clients, this knowledge can be empowering. It reframes their experiences from a personal failure narrative to one of biological and physiological processes that can be understood and, more importantly, changed. As we proceed, keep in mind that neuroscience is not just academic, it's highly practical. It informs every aspect of TIDES, from understanding the impact of trauma to tailoring interventions that facilitate meaningful change. Now, at the heart of the TIDES model is the brain-behavior connection, which informs us that our behaviors are deeply rooted in the neurological processes of our brain. The brain acts as the command center, directing behavior. It's like a conductor leading an orchestra. Every section must work in harmony to produce the desired outcome. Similarly, different parts of the brain work together to influence our actions and decisions. Experiences and environments are like the hands that shape the clay of our brain. Positive experiences can sculpt strong, resilient neural pathways, while negative ones can leave impressions that lead to harmful patterns of behavior. Consider how a nurturing environment can lead to enhanced cognitive development, whereas a hostile one can prime the brain for survival-related behaviors, which may not always align with societal norms. Neuroscience isn't just for the lab. It presents itself in everyday life. For instance, the rush of dopamine when we achieve a goal, or the stress response that we face when we're challenged, that's all neuroscience in action. In applying TIDES, understanding the brain behavior connection empowers us to tailor our approaches to client supervision, ensuring that interventions not only address behaviors, but also the neurological underpinnings of those behaviors. Now, Dr. Bruce Perry, a leading expert in childhood trauma, introduced the concept of state-dependent thinking, which is pivotal in understanding the behavior of our clients. especially within our TIDES framework. Our reaction to an external event is not solely based on the event itself, but heavily influenced by our internal state at that moment. It's like wearing tinted glasses that can color how we see the world. Past experiences, especially those involving trauma or extreme stress, can prime our brain to be on high alert. This sensitized threat response is akin to a security system that's been set way too sensitive, going off at the slightest disturbances. When we perceive a threat, our brain's survival mechanism kicks in. And this activation can restrict access to our frontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, planning, abstract thinking, and decision-making. It's like when a storm hits and the power goes out, leaving us without the full functionality of our home. Understanding this neural response is crucial for TIDES. It helps us comprehend why a client may react rather impulsively or struggle to think clearly in stressful situations. Their brain is in survival mode, not thinking mode. In the context of supervision, this knowledge guides us to create interventions that first aim to calm the threat response, allowing the client to engage their frontal cortex and thus respond appropriately.
And just to keep going with what Joe introduced us in terms of that state-dependent thinking, I just really want to emphasize, first of all, that all of our brains respond this way. This isn't just about clients or individuals who've had a lot of trauma or overwhelming experiences in their lives. What starts to vary, though, is essentially what our kind of go-to state is, or what our brain has kind of learned in terms of how we respond. So here's the biggest difference for a lot of our clients who, again, have experienced a lot of trauma. I'm going to talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. Their brains have learned to be on high alert, as Joe was describing. Their alarm systems are going off at the slightest hint of or perception of a threat. And that, again, is because that is how their brains have learned to survive. They have been hardwired to react in certain ways. So for a lot of our clients, what can happen then is they get kind of stuck in those spaces. So for many of our clients, their brains have learned, again, to be on kind of high alert, to watch out for any kind of threats. So they spend a lot of time in this midbrain space of kind of feeling a sense of alarm, of kind of never knowing what could happen next. And if you are in that space of the brain, it is very easy then to get triggered, to react to a certain stressor, to a certain situation, and then drop down into the brainstem to really be just impulsive and reflexive and just trying to keep ourselves safe. So that's for our clients, a lot of individuals who have struggled to manage and cope with overwhelming situations. And a lot of it, again, it's dependent on our experiences. If you are someone who has had more positive life experiences, who has experienced stress or overwhelming situations, but who have had the resources to manage those, you are likely to spend a little more time on the opposite end of that continuum, kind of being in that space of the limbic system and the cortex system. So in the limbic system, we're on alert. We're maybe feeling a little uneasy, but we're still managing. We're still doing our day-to-day. We're going through the motions. We're doing our work. For a lot of us, and during the times of the pandemic, this might have been a space we were in a little bit more because, again, it was a stressful time. There were a lot of unknowns. We were struggling with some of that, but we were still kind of managing. At the same time, when we are at our most calm, when we are feeling our most safe, our most connected, that is the time when we can really be rooted in our prefrontal cortex, when we're feeling a state of calm. When we are in that space, we can be creative, we can think abstractly, if I can say the term, everybody. We can think long term, we can be reflective and really taking information in. And again, all of us throughout our days will vary depending on what state we're in, depending on what is going on in that day, depending on our emotional state. Did we get enough sleep? Have we eaten? All of those internal experiences will impact kind of our state dependent thinking, and it literally changes where we are kind of functioning in the areas of our brain. So that's a little bit of a bigger picture, diving a little bit deeper into this concept of state dependent thinking. When I really explore this with clients, I like to kind of use a little bit of a different illustration. Because again, this is such important information, really foundational, not just for us as professionals intervening with folks, but really for all of us to understand why we react the way we do at times. So the image I like to use especially when I'm working with clients and explaining this concept, is kind of our brain house. Okay, so that's what you see here on the screen here. Call it brain mapping. Basically, what I explain and how we describe it when we refer to it in our TIDES model is that you can think of three main areas of your brain. And this is an oversimplification, but it really gets at the kind of primary functions that we want our clients to understand, that we want to understand when we're working with them. So we can think of it over here in terms of the basement of the house is the brain stem. That's that reflexive reptilian kind of our part of our brain. That's that primitive space that, again, when we feel threatened, when we feel overwhelmed, when we are simply trying to survive an external threat, we're going to be down here. Our brain's just trying to keep us alive. Then we can think of the first floor, kind of the mid part of the brain, the limbic system, where our amygdala is, where we manage our emotions. This is where the alarm detectors in our brains go off. And again, for clients who've had a lot of trauma, that alarm system is going off at any perception of a threat. How we manage those experiences, how we manage those emotions will have a huge impact on whether we get, and the phrase I like to use is whether we get hijacked, whether we end up back in the basement, or whether we are able to manage those emotions, where we are able to calm ourselves and we're able to then think about the situation. And that gets us to our penthouse, kind of that prefrontal cortex. That is another phrase for it, is our executive functioning center. Joe talked about this a little bit earlier in the neuroscience spaces. We're going to talk about it in terms of interventions a little bit later. But basically, again, our prefrontal cortex is where we think, where we can be rational, where we can be objective, where we can think about long-term consequences of our actions, where we can talk ourselves through this stressful or overwhelming event. But here's the thing. If we get hijacked, if we are struggling in this first floor to manage an emotional or stressful experience, if we end up in the brainstem, the part of our brain that we're not going to have access to for a while, it's going to take us some work to get back up there, is our prefrontal cortex. So that's thinking about those three kind of levels of the brain and how it relates to our ability to think and process information. So knowing that, with that kind of foundation, how does that inform, or how does it influence how we interact with our clients and how we understand or see their behaviors? So that's the piece of understanding the connections in the brain. Then we can talk about this idea, then, well, how do we intervene? If we have a client who is struggling to manage those emotional experiences, if they've been hijacked and they're in this brainstem part of the brain where they're just reacting, they're just trying to keep themselves safe. Well, how do we support that client? Because that client, when they're in the brainstem, again, the part of the brain they can't get to is that penthouse, that prefrontal cortex. And we spend a lot of time asking clients to access their prefrontal cortex. Think about the cognitive behavioral interventions that you do. Think about the case planning, the goal setting, those numerous individual and group programs that we offer. All are valuable, all can be even more valuable, and we can increase their efficacy when we can ensure our clients are calm and able to access their penthouse, that prefrontal cortex. So as we explore TIDES, as we continue to think about this, we're going to talk about then, how do we respond? How do we help a client who's struggling, who's been hijacked, and who's in their basement because, again, of these strong emotional reactions? How do we help those clients to regulate and calm? we did a self-regulation exercise at the beginning of our time together with the square breathing. So knowing and understanding that we first have to help clients regulate when they start to calm and when they start to literally move up those steps to start getting more into that first floor, we can start to make some authentic connections. That ability to connect and relate to others is a huge piece of how we manage those overwhelming emotions. And then when we're connected, when I'm calm, when I feel safe with you, now I have access to my prefrontal cortex. Now I can start to understand and explore why I reacted the way I did, what was happening down here. We can start to look at interventions. We can start to set goals. We can start to shift some of that thinking that leads to those behaviors, all of the work that we typically do. But again, if we are in our prefrontal cortex and we're trying to reason with a client who is dysregulated and in their basement, we're talking like this. We're not able to connect. We don't have those relationships. And that client is going to struggle to even respond to even the simplest of questions. So this space can look like a lot of different things, and we're going to explore that a little bit more as we move forward. But foundational to our interventions with TIDES is understanding these concepts and learning the different skills and approaches to be able to help clients regulate and relate, and then be able to connect and do that intervention work when they are in that state, dependent thinking, when they are in that space where they're really going to be able to engage. That work is going to be so much more effective when we first pay attention to these other needs that we don't typically talk about when you think about the work that we do in cognitive behavioral interventions. So super excited to continue to explore a lot of these different pieces. A couple more things I really want to emphasize, and this is a space of growth and hope, I think, for clients. One of the reasons, go back for a sec, one of the reasons I talk about this with clients is, and Joe alluded to this earlier, was it is a different message. It changes the narrative. It's not about what's wrong with me. It's not about why do I keep doing the same shit over and over again? Why do I keep overreacting? All of those why questions that are often based on shame and defensiveness and can create a sense of disconnection. It's not about there's something wrong with you. It's about understanding what has happened to you over the years. How has your brain learned to respond to those often overwhelming or traumatic experiences? And then the good news is we can help your brain learn to respond in different ways. We can change the connections. We can help you manage these experiences. And that's this concept that you see here of neuroplasticity, this understanding and belief that our brains can change. Kind of a simplistic way of putting it, but that in the essence of it is what this is about. And over the past couple of decades, we have learned so much more about the capacity of our brain to learn from our experiences. So as much as we've been describing working with clients, and I'm going to continue this conversation a little bit, as clients whose brains have learned to respond in a very reactive, kind of survival-based approach, their brains can learn to respond in different ways. We can develop skills and capacities to manage those emotions, to again engage and stay more often in our prefrontal cortex. And as our clients have those different positive experiences, as they learn those skills, as they connect with us in a calm and regulated way, their brains are literally rewiring themselves. That's that hope space. So when I can tell a client, it's not just that there's nothing wrong with you, it's that your brain learned to respond in certain ways to help you survive. But the good news is that there are different ways of surviving, and your brain can learn that. So that's that idea, the second bullet point you see on the screen there, this idea that our experiences are kind of our moderator. Our life experiences impact the neuroscience, the structure and function of our brains. And again, that is a place of hope and growth. And so the question becomes, what are the experiences that we can provide that will enable that growth to occur? So a lot of definitions about trauma. What you see here on the screen is really kind of the space we wanted to emphasize when we think about a trauma-informed desistance approach. And that is understanding that when we talk about being traumatized, we are talking about an internal experience to an external event. So many of us can experience an event. We can maybe experience the same event, but not necessarily be traumatized by it in the same way. So it's not about that external event that traumatizes us or makes us feel in a certain way. Again, it's about our internal experience. So when we are traumatized, our brain has recognized that we are unable to keep ourselves safe. Something has happened that has overwhelmed us. Our typical ability to cope, to respond to a situation hasn't worked. If you think about somebody who describes being attacked and that they froze and they couldn't move, they couldn't keep themselves safe. Their body literally determined that this was too much and there was nothing they could do. If you were running away from somebody chasing you down a dark alley and they catch you and you then just kind of black out, you don't remember what happened after that. Again, that's that space we're talking about. We are traumatized when we were unable to keep ourselves safe. And we experience that inability to keep ourselves safe as an overwhelming threat. A sense of extreme fear, of helplessness and hopelessness. And probably the most impactful thing to understand in terms of thinking about your work with clients is the last point you see there on the screen. That these experiences have lasting long-term effects. It is not just in that moment, but it can be days, weeks, months, even years after an experience. You can still be dealing with, again, those internal lasting long-term effects. So let's take a closer look then at how our brains then interpret these experiences. Literally, our brains interpret this experience of overwhelm, this inability to keep ourselves safe, as a threat to our very survival. And our brain's primary job, in terms of all of this neuroscience we've been talking about, the primary function of our brain is to keep us safe, to keep us alive, to survive. So if you are in a position where your brain has determined that you are unable to keep yourself alive, that this is this overwhelming threat, it's going to activate our autonomic unconscious reactions. You're going to go in the basement of your brain. That reptilian part of your brain is going to kick in, and you're going to fight, freeze, or fawn. You're going to go into these spaces and what Joe described earlier as survival modes. You are simply trying to survive in any way that you can. Now, the survival modes are often learned responses. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is when we're in the basement, that key word there is unconscious reaction. We are not thinking it through. We are not intentionally deciding, I'm going to fight, I'm going to freeze, I'm not going to move, I'm going to run. We're just reacting. The last point to really, especially when we're working with clients who've had those histories of multiple complex trauma that we were talking about, is that it's the key piece here is it a perception, the threat? Our brains, if you are someone who's experienced a lot of trauma, whose, again, limbic system, the threat detection system is on high alert, your brain, any perception of a threat can be enough for your brain to decide and react and go into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. So that's the space where we talk about, triggers is not a word I'm fond of, though it's the word we most commonly use, or a phrase I like is trauma reminders. If we are reminded of a traumatic experience, if we are triggered, it is very easy, again, for our clients who have learned they have to keep themselves safe, to get hijacked, to end up in the basement. So again, it's about that understanding the imprints of trauma, but also in terms of how our brains function. So mention these briefly: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. You're probably more familiar with the first three. A concept that's being added and talked about more in terms of a survival reaction is the concept of fawning. You can think about that as appeasing, even kind of people pleasing, but to kind of an extreme degree. That I will do whatever I can to keep myself safe, even if it means agreeing to the unthinkable. So it's a sense of appeasing. We look at it a lot with victims or survivors of domestic violence or childhood abuse, that they have just learned to try to keep themselves safe by fawning, by appeasing, and seeing those as that same category of survival reactions that, again, that we're more common or more familiar with in terms of that fight, flight, freeze. Key piece about all of this, I know this is a lot of information. Key piece is that these threat perceptions trigger normal adaptive trauma reactions. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn is a normal response to an overwhelming threat. it is our bodies and our brains attempt to help us survive. We all have those moments. We all have those experiences where these reactions are triggered in our attempts to survive. Again, the perception of or a real overwhelming sense of a threat. So it's normal to react. Here's what happens though. If you have been in that space when those adaptive states, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn reactions haven't worked, and you haven't been able to keep yourself safe, especially if that has happened to you multiple times. And again, thinking back to that first slide when we were talking about trauma is not an unusual experience for our clients. When that has happened to you, when you have continued experiences of being overwhelmed, feeling fear and helplessness and powerlessness, when you haven't been able to cope or function, we can continue to react again, days, weeks, months, or years later, as if we are still in danger. And that is important, really important point. I just want to pause here for a second. We're going to talk more about that last idea. But again, thinking about how we've been describing our clients, even maybe think about a particular client that maybe you supervise who is really reactive, whom it doesn't seem to matter what you say or what you do, that they're always emotional, that they're impulsive, that they just always seem to be up here, hypervigilant all of the time. Think about it in terms of they're reacting as if they're still in danger. And again, those behaviors that can often seem aggressive, violent, harmful, we need to understand them in context of survival. So trauma reactions, the space when we're overwhelmed, when we're being triggered, when we're being reminded of those past trauma experiences, again, come from down here. We're not thinking about it. We're not deciding. We're not intentional. We are reacting. So we've talked a little bit about the neurobiological adaptations in a couple of different spaces already, right? In terms of what is happening in your brain, in your body. These trauma reactions, though, also affect how we see the world. You can see cognitive and emotional effects, how we view others, how we interact with others. So our ability to manage those emotions, to recognize what we're thinking. And then what we often see, again, are those isolating or self-injurious behaviors at one end of the continuum, or that aggression, impulsivity that we often kind of bemoan. I mean, how many of you, as you're listening to me, if I told you to raise your hand if your clients act impulsively, I'm guessing the vast majority of us would be raising our hands, right? We have impulsive clients. What if that impulsivity that we see, that behavior, is really more about I am somebody who has learned to react in this strong emotional way, because again, my brain has learned I have to keep myself safe. And so when I'm triggered, when I'm struggling, when I end up in my basement, my first go-to is to punch someone, to yell, to hit, to scream, whatever that looks like. And afterwards, they're like, why did I react that way? I'm so impulsive. What's wrong with me? There's something wrong with them. They're reacting in the ways that their brain has learned to keep them alive, to help them survive. So just to kind of wrap up, because we have a lot of other information to share with you as well, the space of being trauma-informed. So given the information we've been sharing, how do we then be responsive? So research in the space of being trauma-informed has been going on for 20-some years now. Typically, you see in that field either 5 or 6 principles of what it means to be trauma-informed. On this slide, there you go, find the word. What you see on the screen is an infographic actually created for the CDC in collaboration with SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. They have done some absolutely groundbreaking work in being trauma-informed and what that means for multiple professionals in multiple fields over the years. So as we move forward in exploring TIDES, I just want you to kind of keep in your lens, kind of keep your view and thinking about these principles. We're going to talk a lot about how we build safety and trust, the role of peers and social supports, of helping clients be empowered, to make sure their voices and choices are heard. You're going to see a lot of those connections throughout our conversations as we dig deeper into desistance and as we dig deeper into the TIDES approach specifically. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe, as I said earlier, our expert in desistance, to take us then into that next philosophy.
Thank you, Nicole, for that eloquent summation of trauma and trauma-informed care. You did a good job of really introducing or refreshing folks' knowledge of trauma, but really laying the groundwork for why it feeds into our TIDES model. And hopefully I can do the same now with the concept of desistance, which again, this audience, I know at least some of you are aware of, but it's important that we really understand this concept to appreciate how we wove it into our TIDES model. Let's start actually by simply defining what we mean by this notion of desistance from crime. Desistance is not simply the act of stopping crime. It's a dynamic and a gradual process of personal change and transformation. It's like embarking on a long journey and not just stepping away from old paths, but actually creating new courses. The process of desistance is deeply personal and involves a fundamental shift in how individuals perceive themselves. It's akin to shedding an old identity and stepping into a new one. It's a journey from criminal to contributing member of society. Now, this transformation is more than just behavioral. It involves changing how one relates to their past criminal behavior, leading to a genuine and sustained cessation of criminal acts. Think of it not just as avoiding the wrong turns, but also finding a new destination. Moving away from a criminal lifestyle also means disengaging from environments and peer groups that perpetuate that criminal identity. Understanding desistance as a process rather than an event helps us remain patient and supportive as our clients navigate this complex transition. Each step away from crime towards positive change, no matter how small, is progress on the desistance journey. Now, our TIDES model is a pioneering approach that merges the principles of trauma-informed care, which Nicole has highlighted, with desistance theory. It's an acknowledgement that the journey away from crime often intersects with the need to heal from past traumas. Recognizing the impact of trauma is the first step. This means understanding how trauma can influence behavior and decision-making processes. It's not just about what's wrong, but what's happened. TIDES avoids practices that might inadvertently re-traumatize individuals. Our responses are founded on creating a space of safety and connection. We aim to be authentic in our interactions and resilient in our approach, providing a stable and supportive environment for those clients we serve. Now, while acknowledging the risk factors that lead a person into crime, again, those traditional R&R criminogenic needs, TIDES emphasizes the potential for change. It's about shifting that focus from pathways into crime into pathways out, illuminating those exit ramps from a life entangled with the justice system to a crime-free, productive life. In essence, TIDES is more than reducing risk. It's about maximizing each individual's potential for a positive and productive life. It's a commitment to walking alongside those we serve on their journey to desistance and well-being. So let's take a look at our 4 pillars of TIDES, which we have been alluding to. The 4 pillars of TIDES are the foundational elements that guide our approach to supporting desistance and fostering recovery from trauma. They act as the cornerstone upon which the TIDES model is built. That first pillar is that of self-regulation. Now, this pillar is about helping individuals learn to manage their thoughts, emotions, and actions. It's equipping them with the skills to control impulses and handle stress effectively, crucial for both desistance and coping with trauma. Identity transformation is a process where individuals redefine themselves away from a criminal self-concept. It involves cultivating a new self-image that aligns with pro-social values and behaviors. Resiliency is the third pillar of our TIDES model. Resiliency in TIDES is about fostering the ability to bounce back from setbacks and build strength from adversity. And finally, we have the pillar of social support. This pillar emphasizes the importance of relationships and community in that journey of change. It's about nurturing a network that offers support, acceptance, and encouragement for the individual's new pathway. As we move forward in this presentation, we're going to explore each of these pillars in greater depth. And as we do so, just consider how they interact and reinforce with each other. They're not isolated concepts, but interconnected ones that force us to collectively support an individual's journey away from crime and trauma. Remember, these upcoming sections will provide a deeper dive into each of these pillars, offering practical strategies and interventions aligned with our TIDES model. These pillars help us structure our support in a way that's comprehensive, cohesive, and conducive to lasting change. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who's going to talk about that first pillar of TIDES, self-regulation.
Thank you so much, Joe. And as we dive deeper, as Joe put it, into the pillars, I really hope that you kind of think about and see the connections of the theories and philosophies that we've been describing so far, right? Self-regulation is all about understanding that clients with extensive trauma histories, again, and you heard me say this earlier, are going to struggle with this emotional recognition and regulation. That they are going to be struggling to manage those experiences in that first floor part of their brain. And again, this results in those elevated arousal levels that we're talking about in the brain, a heightened threat reaction. So again, alarms are going to be going off quickly and easily anytime there's a perception of a threat. And then again, the important thing to keep in mind as we talk about how we work with our clients every day is that in this space, individuals are unable to access that prefrontal cortex, to engage, to think, to be mindful of their behaviors, to see the connections between past, present, future, to think about the possible outcomes of choices, make decisions, set goals, all the work that we ask clients to do. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about what the state of dysregulation really feels like. Okay, we've been talking a lot about the struggles, about being in the first floor and getting hijacked to the basement and understanding those experiences. But when we are dysregulated, our body and our mind are simply focused on trying to help us calm, to manage those internal, what is truly chaotic states. Dr. van der Kolk, who I mentioned earlier, describes this as being uncomfortable in our very bodies. Our very existence is always kind of trying to think of the way to phrase it, is always on a high alert and is always feeling like you're under threat. In that space, we again are hyper vigilant. We are simply on the outlook for the next threat and figuring out constantly, how do I survive? What does it look like from day to day? And again, as I mentioned earlier, that imbalance of power, someone who has power and authority over them, is often perceived as a threatening experience. And again, by the very definition of the criminal justice system, if you are sitting across from a probation officer's desk, you are there involuntarily. You are there because someone has ordered you to be there, and you are interacting with someone whom has power over you. Now, I used to joke when I supervise clients directly, I do not have as much power as I thought I had, right? We can all recognize that. But at the same time, it isn't about how nice we are. It isn't about how relational we can be. If our clients are in the space of just trying to keep themselves safe, that very imbalance of power, again, can be perceived as a threat. Again, when we're in this space, we're unable to access the prefrontal cortex, and those fight, flight, freeze, and fawn reactions from the basement are going to come quickly and easily anytime our brain has determined there's a threat to my survival and I cannot keep myself safe. I cannot manage these overwhelming experiences of fear, of helplessness, or powerlessness. So, in this space of dysregulation, if that is the reality for a lot of our clients, what we see again are emotional and reactive behaviors. And again, remember, these experiences are always filtered by those past experiences of threat. Our clients have learned to react in certain ways, again, to keep themselves safe. So, if I perceive a threat, if I feel unsafe, if I feel disconnected with you, I am much more likely then in this space to enlist those, to enlist those survival behaviors, to end up in the basement part of my brain where I'm simply reacting, when I'm simply trying to survive. Now, our goal then for our clients is to help regulate these responses. And that's the good news. And I talked about this earlier, right? Good news for our clients that their brains can learn to respond in different ways. The good news for us as professionals is we can learn to interact, to be responsive, to recognize the signs that maybe our clients are feeling dysregulated. They're struggling to manage these overwhelming emotions. And we can intentionally and mindfully introduce activities like our square breathing. We can talk a lot about how to regulate and manage those experiences and teach clients skills and create safe environments that clients are more likely to have what you see on my right hand side of the screen, the regulated response. And that is our goal. We want our clients to be able to feel safe, to feel connected, to be regulated. And when they're in that space, again, they have access to the prefrontal cortex. We're focused on the present. This is a space where I can learn. This is a space where I can set goals, where I can think about, imagine what I want for the future, to be creative, to be authentic and genuine and truthful with you as a probation officer, as somebody who I'm working with day in and day out. That regulated response reflects a sense of agency and self-efficacy. Those are two really key concepts that we really explore in our TIDES model. How do we augment? How do we support? The sense of agency essentially is the belief that I can change, that as an individual, I can succeed, I can do things differently, I can find my pathways out and discover who I am and who I want to be. Now, that sense of agency needs to be accompanied by an experience of self-efficacy. And self-efficacy really reflects the ability that I believe I can be successful. A little different than self-esteem, a little different than confidence, but it's really a belief that not only can I change, I can be successful in maintaining and reaching those goals, of achieving that change that I am hoping to achieve. So those experiences of agency and self-efficacy, think about what we've been talking about in terms of how the brain works. What I just described there is what I would say are prefrontal cortex functions, right? Those are executive functioning abilities. If I, again, am dysregulated and not able to access this part of my brain, I'm not going to be able to learn. I'm not going to believe I can change because, again, I am stuck in a cycle of survival. So when we introduce the TIDES model, when we start to think about and understand these reactions and responses, the goal for us as professionals is, again, to recognize signs that someone is dysregulated, to understand the context we've been describing. Two, by the way, keep ourselves regulated because as our clients elevate, as they get emotional and reactive, it's very easy for us to rise to the occasion, if you will, right? To meet them in that same space. So recognizing our own triggers, keeping ourselves in a calm, safe space where we are regulated. And then again, using those skills, exploring different ways of creating a sense of safety and connection to help regulate our clients, to help get them out of the basement, back to the first floor where they can connect with us. And then again, up to that penthouse where we can learn, where we can engage, where we can connect, doing all the work that we do every day, but in ways that our clients are going to be able to receive and truly engage with. So that's a little bit about that concept of self-regulation. And I really see the ties with identity, which Joe is going to explore with us a little bit, because again, when we're dysregulated, we aren't thinking about how we see ourselves. We're not thinking about how we can connect with others. We really lose that sense of self. So I'm excited for Joe to dive in a little bit and talk about how important the space of identity and identity transformation is as one of the pillars of TIDES.
Thank you for that, Nicole. And yes, hopefully as we continue to roll out these pillars, the audience will also see what you refer to there, that sort of synergy between these pillars. Now in TIDES, understanding identity is crucial, not just in the context rather of desistance, but also in trauma recovery. Identity influences rather, and is influenced by both these processes, intertwining the journey away from crime with the path to healing from trauma. How an individual sees themselves is often shaped by their experiences, including traumatic ones. Trauma can lead to a fractured or negative self-perception. Part of our work is to help individuals rebuild a positive identity, one that transcends the labels of victim or offender and embraces resiliency and capability. The way others perceive those who have experienced trauma or have been involved in the criminal justice system can significantly impact their recovery and desistance journey. It is essential to foster a community environment that sees beyond these past experiences and acknowledges that an individual's potential for change and growth truly exists. Self-labeling is a critical aspect here as well. Labels can become internalized and form a core concept of one's identity. In both trauma recovery and desistance, shifting from disempowering labels to empowering ones is vital. This shift aids in reclaiming agency and rewriting one's narrative towards a more positive future. Now, in the following sections on identity, we're going to explore strategies to support clients in redefining their self-concept. This involves addressing both experiences of trauma and their involvement in criminal activities, recognizing the deep interconnection between these aspects of shaping one's identity. By tackling identity from both trauma and desistance lenses, we aim to provide a holistic approach. This dual focus is key to facilitating comprehensive healing and transformation, paving the way for a sustainable shift away from criminality towards a healthier, more integrated self. Now, trauma, especially as Nicole alluded to, is severe or prolonged, can overwhelm an individual to the extent that it disrupts their core sense of self, of who they are. It's like being lost in a storm where the landmarks that defined who you are become obscured. In the chaos that trauma often brings, individuals may lose touch with their true identity. And without this anchor, there's a risk of adopting the labels and definitions imposed by others or even one's own actions. It's as if in the absence of a clear image, people start to see themselves only through the lens of their worst moments or the labels that society gives us. The loss of self can lead to a cycle where criminal behavior, or the status of being a victim becomes a defining identity. It's a dangerous narrative that can perpetuate feelings of helplessness, and entrapment in negative patterns. Now, desistance in this context offers a path to redefine one's self-perception. It's an invitation to step away from the offender or victim identity and to start seeing oneself as someone capable of positive change and growth. Encouraging identity transformation in individuals who have experienced trauma or engaged in criminal behavior is about empowering them to write a new story for themselves. Now, this transformation is integral, like I said, both in trauma recovery and desistance. It's about finding one's way back to one's true self, one that is whole, resilient, and forward-looking. Let's explore this a little bit further and take a look at another thought leader in the field, Dr. Shad Maruna. Shad's work in Desistance is really groundbreaking, and his concept of redemption scripts really underlines the importance of narrative in the process of identity transformation. As Shad puts it, it's really about rewriting one's own story. Identity plays a crucial role in Desistance because it's at the core of how an individual perceives and projects themselves. The restoring process is about moving away from their criminal identity to one of redemption and growth. Dr. Maruna's redemption script concept is a powerful narrative tool that enables individuals to reframe their past behaviors within a context of change and recovery, allowing them to see themselves as the heroes in their story and not the villain. This process involves a critical examination of one's life story, challenging the criminal label and actively constructing a new narrative that emphasizes one's ability to change, contribute positively, and connect with society. Now, in TIDES, we facilitate this narrative transformation by encouraging clients to engage in reflection and storytelling that portrays them as capable of overcoming their past and contributing to meaningful members of society. Identity reformation, it's not a superficial label change. It's a deep psychological shift that aligns with an individual's self-concept with pro-social behaviors and values. It is an essential step in their journey towards sustainable desistance. Through the TIDES model, we support individuals in developing their redemption scripts, helping them to recognize their worth, cultivate hope, and envision a future where they are active, positive participants in their communities. Just a bit more on this concept, but as you can see here, redemption scripts are about reclaiming their true self, that self that each individual feels they were meant to be before being sidetracked by trauma, victimization, or survival behaviors necessitated by the circumstances they found themselves in. This concept of a true self, it's not a naive return to an idealized past, but rather an understanding that each person has an authentic identity, not defined by their worst actions or the worst things that have happened to them. Trauma and victimization can lead to survival behaviors that are often mistaken for the person's true character. But these are responses to extraordinary circumstances, not reflections of the person's authentic self. Part of constructing a redemption script involves a conscious acceptance of past actions and their consequences. It's a process that involves making peace with one's history while taking responsibility for it. Redefining who we want to be is the next step in the narrative. It's about setting a vision for the future that aligns with one's values and aspirations, rather than being anchored to a criminal identity. Belief in the possibility of becoming this envisioned self is the fuel that drives change. It's a powerful motivator that propels individuals forward in their desistance journey. And in TIDES, it really underscores the importance of validation from others in solidifying this new identity. When the community, family, or social groups recognize and affirm the individual's change, it reinforces their belief in their narrative and supports their continued transformation. Fergus McNeil introduces the idea of a replacement self as a fundamental aspect of the desistance process, which is central to our TIDES approach. It represents the development of a self-identity that feels both true and authentic to the individual. The replacement self, it's not about becoming a completely different person, but rather about rediscovering or reinventing oneself in a manner that feels genuine and congruent with one's values and aspirations. This concept underscores the process of shedding the layers that were imposed by a criminal lifestyle or by trauma, and is built on an individual's strengths and potential for positive contributions to society. Being true and authentic means aligning one's actions with one's beliefs and values. It's about living in a way that is consistent with who the person wants to be and is recognized as such by themselves and by others. And in TIDES, we support individuals in exploring and defining what this replacement self looks like for them. We create a supportive environment that encourages self-exploration and fosters the development of an identity that embraces change, growth, and pro-social living. Dr. McNeil's replacement self concept is a beacon of hope for those engaged in the challenging work of changing their lives. And it serves as a reminder that everyone has the capacity for transformation, and that an authentic, fulfilling life after crime is not only possible, but achievable. And now Nicole is going to take on the third pillar of TIDES, that of resilience.
Well, and I love that you emphasize that role of hope, Joe, because hope is really essential to any kind of change. We know from that research, both in terms of healing from trauma and reconciling those experiences, as well as desisting from a life of crime, as you've been describing, it really requires a sense of hope, a belief that something can change, a belief that we can be or do something differently. And so a key space there that, again, I don't think we haven't as a field really talked about and reflected on is this concept of resilience, is the sense of how do we move forward? How do we respond to the face in the face of extreme adversity or trauma? So I love the Harvard Center for the Developing Child has been doing some really groundbreaking research into the concept of resilience and how do we develop resilience? How do we understand it? And our understanding overall of resilience is continuing to change and transform. So a couple of key pieces we're going to advertise, emphasize was the word I was reaching for. A key space that we want to emphasize and how resilience relates to the other pillars in the TIDES model is, again, the interaction of our neuroscience, of our internal experiences and those external experiences, and understanding that how we as professionals can help build our clients' abilities to cope with and overcome adversity. So it's very much a space of reinforcing strengths, of building supports. It's a space of perceiving ourselves in a different way, just as Joe was describing in terms of identity transformation. And so let's take a closer look then at how this concept of resilience, how we can respond positively in the face of extreme adversity or trauma, how that works with the other pillars that we've been describing. So a couple of things I really want to emphasize in terms of resilience. I think traditionally we tend to think of resilience as kind of what you see in the bottom there, kind of a static trait, that an ability to bounce back. And that kind of perspective that, some of us are just more resilient than others. Because the question that we've asked truly for numerous years is why do some individuals whom have grown up with all of the challenges that we've been describing still go on to succeed? While others struggle, while others get stuck in our criminal justice system, while others struggle to find jobs, school, all of those different spaces, all those risk factors that we assess. And for a time, we just kind of thought, well, some people are just hardwired a little differently. Some people have certain traits and abilities that simply you can't really change, that they're static, that just help them to bounce back. But again, as research continues to evolve in this space of understanding resilience, we're starting to push back on that traditional perspective and understand that resilience is truly a dynamic characteristic. It is something that is changeable and learnable. That's an empowering perspective. Again, if you thought about resiliency as just a static trait, as just an ability to bounce back, then the easy question to ask an individual who hasn't been able to bounce back, who hasn't been able to move on or do all of the things that you were supposed to be able to do, well, the question becomes one, what? What's wrong with me? Am I not smart enough? Am I not strong enough? Do I just have to work harder and try harder? Um, and that can be kind of that self-defeating kind of space. That really, to me, is an example of those condemnation scripts that Joe was describing. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. This is just who I am. And again, what we're learning is that resiliency is really about the interaction between our life experiences and some internal experiences and traits, but that it's something, again, that we can change and learn. So if we think about it from that space, from that definition, so how do we help clients become more resilient? Well, again, a couple of things we have to understand. First of all, again, are those experiences, right? Experiences of trauma, extreme adversity, again, are going to negatively impact the structure and function of the brain. We've talked about that from a couple of different perspectives in our time with you all so far today. And those changes that we've been describing inhibit adaptive coping skills, things like self-regulation, emotional management, executive functioning. Basically, what have we been saying? That for clients who've experienced a lot of trauma, the part of the brain they have difficulty accessing is, again, that prefrontal cortex, where all these adaptive coping skills are going to take place. So we need to first recognize those spaces and understand that. But again, then know that, just as we've been talking about, our brains are experience dependent, that we can build resilience by developing skills that promote flexibility and adaptability. So if you think about a lot of the cognitive interventions that a lot of us do when we're working with clients, we talk about things like knowing their feelings. Very simple social skill, right? We think of it, at least, as a very simple social skill. Again, requires ability to access our prefrontal cortex, to be able to master that. Recognizing and managing emotions is absolutely one of those adaptive coping skills that we talk about in terms of building resilience. Because if I have the ability to know what I'm feeling, I can recognize my triggers, I can manage those emotions, I am learning what? I am learning that I can change, that I can respond to an overwhelming or threatening situation in a different way. I can think about my situation from a different perspective because, again, if I'm managing those emotions, I'm then able to access my prefrontal cortex, my executive functioning center. So when we think about resilience as the ability to respond in a positive way to trauma and adversity, that is absolutely requires, again, those executive thinking skills that we've been describing and talking about. We need to be able to consider, again, long-term consequences and solutions. We need to be able to be creative, to be able to think about the context of our experiences in a broader space of our life and where we want to go and who we want to become. So building resilience is about developing those skills that promote that cognitive flexibility, if you will, that allow us to then again respond in a different way. That's only part of, though, our ability in the definition in terms of building resilience. So the building and creating a space where we can learn adaptive functioning skills to cope in different ways, to respond in different ways, is that first space of how do we build resilience for clients? How do we support that process for the individuals we work with? Here's the other thing that we're learning about resilience is it is about those adaptive coping skills, about that executive functioning ability. It is also about the relationships in our lives, about the connections that we make with each other. And again, Harvard Center for the Developing Child has done some really amazing research. And what they keep coming back to for children and then throughout our lives is the importance of relationships. That when we have at least one stable, supported, committed relationship, one authentic connection in our lives, that relationship provides a buffer with some of the overwhelming experiences of trauma and stress that we've been describing. And within the context of being able to engage and connect, to build that relationship, again, it's a space where we learn to manage those emotions, a space when we're then able to do the work of developing those coping skills and that different way of responding that we've been describing and talking about. So that one person, that one relationship can take a lot of different forms and roles. We think about it most frequently in terms of attachment theory, in terms of small children and parents, of having somebody who is responsive to their needs, and having that throughout their lives. But what do we know about our clients? We know that a lot of the clients we are working to support likely did not have that relationship. And again, it's not to suggest that, well, they're out of luck, right? That they're just not able to bounce back. But it is to understand that in the absence of that relationship and in the face of the trauma and the extreme adversity so many of our clients have experienced, there is, a gap, if you will. They haven't learned how to relate and connect. They haven't learned to trust. That has shaped their perceptions of the world. That has shaped how they react and respond to overwhelming experiences of trauma and stress. The good news, again, in terms of neuroplasticity, in terms of the impact of experiences, is that even as we get older, we still can create and maintain and sustain those relationships. It is harder work, to put it pretty simply, if we have grown up without this ability to engage and connect, but it is still a skill that we can develop. You think about resiliency in the context of the TIDES model, in the context of what Joe and I have been describing up to this point. That piece of self-regulation is about calming and managing and learning to manage those emotions that we were talking about, right? To, again, help clients get to that space where they're able to adapt and change and learn and grow. That piece of identity, how do I see myself? Do I see myself as somebody who can engage and connect with others? Do I believe I am worthy of someone caring and responding to me? How I see myself. If I begin to see myself as this authentic individual, well, I am someone then who can connect to others. So we can see throughout the TIDES process that our pillars are really, they're supporting the same house. I guess it's kind of what a pillar does if you think about it. And how they interact is something we'll just want to keep encouraging you to think about and imagine as we keep moving forward. And to understand that in terms of helping our clients build resiliency, we're very much putting in place protective factors and relationships that are going to buffer the trauma and the continued challenges that our clients are going to have in a way that's going to position them to be able to take those other steps that Joe's been describing in terms of desistance and imagine what success can look like and imagine that replacement self, who they want to be and how are they going to relate and connect with others in their lives. Resiliency, space, and relationships really leads us into that next pillar of TIDES in terms of social supports, of understanding the importance of relationship and connection. And as Joe's been touching on, I'm going to turn it over to him to really explore how the community can give back and reinforce that ability to relate and connect.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, let's drive it home here with the fourth and final pillar of our TIDES framework, that of social support. And social support is really the cornerstone in the edifice of recovery and change. It's sort of like the scaffolding that supports individuals as they rebuild their lives following trauma and as they journey away from crime. Opportunities for change often come from one's social environment. Positive relationships and supportive communities can act as catalysts, offering not just a safety net, but also a springboard for growth and transformation. Community recognition of individual change is vital. It's not enough for individuals to change. Their environment must acknowledge this change. This recognition can reaffirm a person's new identity and reinforce their commitment to a pro-social life. A renewed sense of self often emerges in the context of supportive relationships. When individuals feel accepted and valued, they are more likely to embrace their positive attributes and see themselves beyond the stigma of their past. Finding acceptance is about more than just being tolerated. It's about being welcomed and integrated into the community fabric. Acceptance provides a sense of belonging and purpose, which are essential for sustained desistance and healing from trauma. In TIDES, we understand that social support bridges the gap between individual effort and community integration. And we strive to create networks of support that affirm the individual's worth and potential, thus enabling both desistance from crime and recovery from trauma. So let's take a look first at how social support plays a role in the desistance process, and then I'll bring it back and talk about how social support also plays a critical role in trauma recovery. Now, Fergus McNeil's poignant observation brings to light a fundamental truth in our TIDES framework. The work of personal transformation, while critical, must be met with societal reintegration for it to fully bear fruit. The essence of TIDES is not just in supporting individuals through their personal journey or change, but also in facilitating a conducive environment for this change to be recognized and sustained. It is a reminder that desistance from crime and recovery from trauma are not solely individual endeavors, but communal responsibilities. Dr. McNeil's statement highlights the importance of community in the desistance process. If the hard work of individuals in changing their behavior and their identity is not met with opportunities for social integration, there's a risk, a very real risk, that their progress may stall or even regress. In TIDES, we stress the importance of creating pathways for acceptance. This involves working with both clients and communities to foster understanding, reduce stigma, and build bridges that allow for successful reentry and acceptance. Community acceptance is a powerful affirmation that reinforces an individual's new identity and pro-social behavior. It is the societal mirror that reflects the transformed self back to the individual, solidifying their new narrative. TIDES actively engages with our community partners, families, and social networks to create a supportive ecosystem that not only acknowledges the hard work of our clients, but also offers them a role and a place within the community. It's about closing the loop from personal transformation to community integration. Fergus has this concept of what he calls the ties that bind, which really speak to the dual nature of social connections in the desistance process. Now, these ties can provide support, giving individuals a reason to change, while also imposing constraints that discourage antisocial behavior. This sort of mutually supportive aspect of these ties, it refers to the positive reinforcement that comes from relationships. Commitments to family and to loved ones can inspire and motivate individuals to desist from crime, offering a stake in conformity, if you will, that outweighs the pull of criminality. But conversely, these connections are mutually constraining. because they create sort of a social obligation to behave in ways that maintain the relationship and the well-being of others involved. There's a sense of responsibility that comes with social ties, which can act as a powerful deterrent to crime. Dr. McNeil's view, although it echoes elements of social learning theory from our R&R framework, which, as you know, suggests that behaviors are learned through observation and reinforcement within social circles. But Fergus places a greater emphasis on the emotional and relational dimensions of these connections. And in the TIDES model, we recognize that social ties are not just about learning behaviors, but about forming deep emotional bonds that can fundamentally shape one's identity and decision-making process. Now, while R&R's social learning theory focuses on the influence of one's social environment and peer groups, TIDES expands this to include the power of emotional bonds and commitments. These ties create a vested interest in living a pro-social life for the sake of oneself and one's loved ones. In essence, the TIDES approach weaves the social learning aspect of behavior change with the emotions and relational ties highlighted by Fergus McNeil's work. It creates a comprehensive understanding of how social connections can both support and shape the journey towards desistance. Segueing now to the role of social support in recover from trauma, as we know, and Nicole has touched on, trauma often acts as a barrier to social connection, which is a critical component of both trauma recovery and desistance from crime. Trauma can distort our self-perception and our perception of others, leading to experiences of shame and isolation. Shame is a common response to trauma and can be exacerbated by labeling and dehumanization. These experiences can cause individuals to internalize negative beliefs about themselves, which may lead to withdrawal and a reluctance to engage with others. Labeling and dehumanization, often reinforced by societal stigmas, can contribute to a sense of disconnection. When individuals feel reduced to a label or seen as less than human, it undermines their sense of self and belonging. Isolation and a lack of belonging are both symptoms and contributors to the ongoing impact of trauma. When individuals lack a sense of community, it can reinforce feelings of alienation and impede the process of healing and desistance. Now, this living among aliens metaphor captures the sense of estrangement that trauma survivors often experience. It's as though they feel like outsiders in their own world, unable to connect with those around them who seem so different and unreachable. In TIDES, we recognize the importance of rebuilding trust and connection as part of the recovery and desistance process. We aim to create spaces where individuals feel safe to share their experiences, free from judgment and stigma, and can begin to reestablish those critical social bonds. Social support in TIDES is more than just being in the company of other pro-social individuals. It's about fostering genuine connection that affirms one's humanity and facilitates a sense of belonging. It's about helping individuals move from feeling like aliens to feeling like valued members of the community. Finally, I want to draw your attention to the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. His insights into human connection align seamlessly with the principle of TIDES. His assertion that, quote, "we are hardwired for connection," really resonates deeply with this pillar of social support within our TIDES model. Attachment theory, integral to our understanding of human development, it posits that our ability to form secure attachments is critical to our survival. Now, this theory provides a framework for understanding the importance of relationships in fostering resilience and promoting desistance from crime. A genuine experience of safety is more than just the absence of threat. It's the presence of secure connections and the emotional assurance that one is not alone. Safety is both physical and psychological, and it's essential in healing from trauma and encouraging desistance. The presence of supportive relationships can significantly lower one's stress levels. Stress is not just a biological response, but a psychological one that is mitigated by the presence of empathetic, understanding relationships. Emotional isolation can be particularly damaging as it hampers our ability to manage and respond to stress effectively. It can aggravate the negative impacts of trauma and hinder the desistance process by increasing vulnerability to stress-induced relapse and criminal behavior. Now, in the TIDES model, we emphasize building and maintaining connections as a way to provide safety, reduce stress, and combat isolation. By fostering strong social networks, we help individuals develop the emotional and relational resources that are necessary for sustained recovery from trauma and moving them towards desistance from crime. Let's take a look then at the 4 pillars again, which we've now explored, each representing really a cardinal direction in the compass of change. Again, those of self-regulation, identity, resiliency, and social support. Together, they create a holistic approach to supporting desistance from crime and trauma recovery. Just to quickly recap, self-regulation is about recognizing and managing emotions, as well as restructuring reactive thought patterns. It's empowering clients to become captains of their own emotional ships, navigating through tumultuous waters of impulsivity and reactivity. Identity focuses on becoming the author of our stories, developing a sense of agency and self-efficacy. It's about charting a course towards a destination where individuals define themselves by their values and aspirations, not their past. Resiliency is building those internal characteristics that strengthen while restoring relationships. It's equipping our clients with the internal compass to find their way back to a positive path, even after being thrown off course. And finally, as I just talked about, social support involves engaging with external resources and fostering a community that embraces and accepts. It's about ensuring that our clients aren't navigating their journey in isolation, but are surrounded by a supportive crew. And now as we transition a little bit here from understanding the foundational pillars to applying them, we're going to introduce to you the TIDES compass. Now, this is our guide to navigating client interactions, ensuring that every step we take is aligned with those principles of TIDES and directed towards positive outcomes. This TIDES compass will be our practical tool for steering interactions with clients, ensuring that we embody the principles of each pillar in our work. Think of it as a navigational tool that keeps us on course, ensuring that every interaction is purposeful and supportive of your client's journey. Now, the first point of the compass, and think back to the brain house that Nicole walked you through, the first point of the compass is to regulate and relate. This emphasizes the importance of establishing a connection with the clients. It's about creating an environment where emotions are understood and managed, and where the working alliance is strengthened through effective engagement. Reasoning involves collaboration between the client and the probation officer, with both parties reaching mutual agreement on the focus of change. It's a shift from directive to collaborative, ensuring that the client's voice and choices are central in this process. Intervening is where we facilitate the chosen intervention. It's the application of strategies and techniques that align with our principles of TIDES, tailored to support the client's journey towards desistance and recovery. And empowering is about agreeing on next steps and reinforcing the client's autonomy and strengths. It's a forward-looking component where we ensure that the client leaves with a clear sense of direction and the confidence to continue their progress. Now we're going to segue into modeling and interaction between Maya and Jordan, our probation officer and client, and we'll see how the TIDES compass directs a more client-centered approach compared to a traditional R&R interaction. It's really about demonstrating the nuanced and empathetic stance that TIDES really embodies. Keep in mind that this webinar is really a primer to our TIDES approach, and that our model is designed to pique your interest and demonstrate the effectiveness of TIDES, and hopefully highlight some of its intricacies. Our aim here is to invite curiosity and encourage further learning about our TIDES model. All right, and now to illustrate the different tone that approaching a client through the TIDES framework versus the traditional R&R lens may look like, we're going to give you a down and dirty demo here of client Jordan and probation officer Maya. And we first want you to visualize this interaction between Jordan and officer Maya rather. First, strictly using the risk, need, responsivity framework without any of the elements of the TIDES model that we've just introduced you all to. So here's your setting: a functional clinical room in the probation office. It's well lit with a table separating Jordan and officer Maya. And on the desk are some official looking documents and Maya's computer. Clock ticking in the corner. Let's look at how this interaction might look through those R&R principles, starting with, of course, the risk principle.
All right. So, Jordan, good to see you. Just to jump right in, we need to assess your risk level today. So, just let me know, have you come into contact with any of your previous associates since our last meeting?
A couple of times, unintentionally. I saw them at the shops.
I understand that, but you really need to minimize these encounters. They pose a high risk for reoffending.
And now looking at the needs principle.
So, Jordan, let's discuss your needs. I remember you mentioning issues with impulsivity and substance abuse. Have you taken any steps to address these?
I've tried to stay away from drinking, but it's hard. And I'm still looking for a job, but not too many places want to hire somebody with a record.
Well, Jordan, it's really essential for your rehabilitation to find employment and avoid substances. And we've got a list of places that offers jobs to individuals on probation. I'll be sure and give it to you before you leave.
And then finally, let's look at what the responsivity principle in practice may look like.
So considering your history and your challenges, Jordan, I believe a structured setting really might help. How about attending a weekly group where individuals with similar backgrounds share their experiences and coping strategies?
I can try, I guess. It just feels like another box to tick.
Well, the idea is it's really designed to give you tools and strategies to reintegrate into society successfully. I want to make sure you attend, though, okay? I'm going to have to note it in your records.
And then the closing of that visit might sound something like this.
Now, remember, Jordan, the goal here is to reduce your risk of reoffending. The choices you make now are going to determine your future. Stay away from risks, address your needs, and be receptive to the interventions we're suggesting.
Got it. End scene. Now, in this R&R focused interaction, The approach is much more structured and centered on assessing risk and addressing criminogenic needs. Now, while R&R is evidence-based and it is effective, the interaction might come across as less personalized and really just more procedural to Jordan. The comparison between the TIDES enhanced interaction and the more R&R focused one really highlights the differences that being a holistic, person-centered approach can look like versus that more clinical, risk-focused approach. So we're going to deja vu this and do the same probation officer client interaction, this time through that TIDES perspective. Now here, our setting is a comfortable private room at the probation office. There's soft lighting, a desk with 2 chairs opposite each other, a few plants for a touch of nature, and there's a nice motivational poster on the wall. Let's look at this interaction not through the principles of risk, need, and responsivity, but rather through the TIDES compass that we just introduced you to, starting with that first compass point of regulate and relate. Think brain house.
All right. So hey, Jordan, it is so good to see you. Before we dive in, how do you feel about taking a moment to kind of get centered? So maybe we do a quick breathing exercise together. It kind of helps just set a positive tone, kind of help bring us together. What do you say?
Sure, I guess.
All right. I appreciate that. We'll do it together, okay? So 3 deep breaths. So take a nice deep breath in, hold it for a second, and then out. Maybe try one more, another deep breath in. Maybe hold this one for a little bit longer. Then exhale. Nice. Okay, how about one more, okay? Just at your own pace this time. Awesome. How do you feel?
A bit calmer, actually.
Very cool. All right. That's the idea. Remember, this space is for you, really. I'm here to support, not here to judge.
All right, now we're going to look at that second compass point, that of reasoning.
All right. So let's chat a little bit about how things have been going since our last meeting. Okay. Have there been any challenges or things that you'd like to share? Let's, set a focus for our conversation today.
Well, I've been struggling with avoiding some of my old friends. They're not good for me, but they're familiar,
No, I hear you. Absolutely. It's a really common challenge, actually. It's not easy leaving behind what's familiar, even if it's not beneficial, right? So let's explore some ways to help you build some new positive connections, but also reinforcing your identity as someone striving for better.
And now we're going to look at the next compass point, rather, that of conducting the intervention.
All right, so Jordan, I would love to introduce you to a concept from kind of that TIDES model that I've talked a little bit about, social support. You've shown amazing self-regulation by recognizing the need to distance from kind of negative influences. Now let's work on fostering positive, supportive relationships. How would you feel about joining, say, a community group or a local club as a start?
Down at the rec center, they've got these music classes, which, as nerdy as that might sound, I've actually thought about that. I mean, music has really always been an escape for me. So that might be something to explore, just to sort of change that friend group around a little bit.
I think that's a fantastic idea. Not nerdy, by the way, in the slightest. Music, really not only offers an escape, but it really can also be a tool for resilience, right? It's going to help reshape your identity, build new friendships, and give you kind of a platform or a space to maybe start to express some things and start to heal.
And then finally, that final compass point, that of empowering the client.
So I believe in your potential, Jordan. With each choice you make, you are moving towards positive change and you're rewriting your story. How about setting even a small goal for our next meeting? Perhaps attending one music class?
Sounds good. I'll give it a shot.
So remember, it's all about taking small steps. Let's celebrate every success and learn from every stumble. I'm truly here to support you every step of the way.
And end scene. So now in that interaction, Officer Maya leverages her TIDES knowledge to not just go through a procedural check-in, but to genuinely connect with and empower Jordan. These compass steps of regulating and reasoning and intervening and empowering really ensure that each meeting is structured, focused, and leads to tangible outcomes. The aim is to make Jordan feel understood, supported, and in control of his journey.
We have been so excited to not only share the concepts and theories and philosophies behind tides today, but also to show you what it can look like. How do we put those theories into practice? So we would love to continue conversations to help engage and support you all in building your understanding of pathways in, but really discovering the pathways out of crime and that lifestyle for the clients that you're supporting. So our focus on TIDES is absolutely to continue on the good work that so many of you are already doing and understanding those pathways in, but really continuing to explore what are the pieces that we're not addressing? What are the pieces that we've missed so far that we can really know from the research and the philosophies behind it will truly enable our clients to transform those identities, to explore new places, spaces, and routines, to build that desistance from crime, not just in terms of reducing behaviors, but a truly changing the way they see themselves, the way they connect with others, and the way their families and communities perceive them. So very excited to have spent the time with you today and sharing about our TIDES model. Would love to again connect and hear more. Thank you so much for your time and the attention. And please feel free to contact us. Our email accounts are there. We are both active on LinkedIn and would love to share the theories and concepts and help you learn how you can put TIDES into practice in your work or with your agency.
It's always an honor and a pleasure to work with such a fine organization. We appreciate this opportunity to speak to the delegates and the trainees, and we look forward to more interactions with, again, a great organization in the American Probation and Parole Association. Take care, everybody. If you're in Seattle, enjoy the conference. If not, we will see you next time.